Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Paul.
And I'm David.
And we're with the DiceyReview.com. And today we're going to be looking at the 2 to 4 player game Fields of Green, and we're going to be looking at the version that was released by Stronghold Games. In Fields of Green, we're going to be taking the role of farmers who are trying to expand our property and our business. We're going to be putting down fields and livestock and construction that we will hopefully use to expand our economic engine and bring us closer to victory.
The game is played in 4 rounds. Each round represents a year where players will draft cards and add them to their ever-expanding farms. By expansion, players will get resources and goods that they can use to expand further in following years. Through various means, the players will convert those resources into victory points. And at the end of the game, the player with the most victory points wins.
Now that we've talked a little bit about the theme, let's look at how to set the game up and then the different actions that you can take during the rounds. So the first thing we'll need to do is shuffle up the cards that we'll be drawing throughout the game. The cards in Fields of Green come in 4 different categories. We have fields, livestock, constructions, and buildings. You can shuffle up the different cards and place them next to the markers that indicate which card is there.
Next, you'll take your silo and water tower cards, separate those out, and place them next to your other 4 types of cards.
Next, each player will need to receive the 2 player aid cards. 1 card details the available actions, and 1 card details what happens during a year. Place these face up next to the player areas. The round marker will need to be placed somewhere within easy reach of all players, and then the first player token will be given to the player who will be playing first in the round.
Next, you'll take your money, your victory point tokens, and your resources and place them within easy reach of all players.
Each player will also receive a silo and water tower card. These 2 locations will form the start of a player's farm. Each silo will need 1 food, and each water tower will need 3 water tokens. The game comes with a stack of equipment tiles that will need to be shuffled and placed within easy reach of all players.
Give each player 15 coins to start. And finally, you'll place your round marker on round 1. Looks like we're ready to go.
So now that we've seen a complete setup, let's look at the different phases within the game.
This brings us to our first upkeep phase. Since we placed our round marker on the first round, you can see the arrows indicate which direction we'll be passing cards for each round. First and third rounds, you'll pass to the left. Second and fourth, you'll pass to the right.
Since I'm the last person to have visited a farm, I've gotten the first player marker, which means that I'll be drawing my 6 cards first. What happens in each upkeep phase of Fields of Green is players are going to be drawing 6 cards from at least 3 of the 4 stacks. The stacks of cards each represent a different type of expansion within your farm. The game comes with a card that illustrates a suggested draw for an introductory strategy. I'm going to be following the suggested draw for each round, while David may be a little bit more creative in how he draws his cards. So as the card dictates, I'm going to draw 3 field cards, 2 livestock cards, and 1 construction card. It's important to note that when drawing cards, you have to decide which number of cards you're going to draw from each stack before you see the cards you've drawn. Cards must be drawn all at once, essentially.
Like Paul was saying, I'm going to mix it up a little bit because I have a different strategy going in. I'm just going to choose 2 from each of these 3 decks. As long as I'm choosing from 3 separate decks, I'm allowed to choose any number or combination that I want. In each round, players will have 6 actions that give them the opportunity to expand their farm, gain wealth, or turn over areas in their farm that have been turned over in previous years. Fields of Green is a drafting game, so you'll have your hand of 6 cards, of which you'll choose 1 to keep, placing it face down next to your player area. After you do that, you'll pass your remaining cards in the direction indicated on the round marker. Once you've chosen your action and passed your remaining action cards, all players will reveal and take their action at the same time. Once you've revealed and taken your action, you'll take the remaining cards that have been passed to you by your neighbor and choose another action card and pass your cards again, continuing play in this way until all 6 cards have been played by every player.
Now that we've looked at the basic structure of a draft, we're going to look at the first of the 5 actions that you can take in your turn, building a location. When you're building a location in your farm, the new location has to be placed adjacent to existing locations within your farm. Each location will have a cost in the top left corner. There will usually be a coin cost, and in addition, there could be water or food that's required. If there's a food cost, you can pay from any location on your farm. There's no distance requirement as long as you have food available. Now that we've talked about the structure of a draft phase, let's look at the first of the 5 actions that you can take, building a location. When you build a location, it has to be placed adjacent to an existing location within your farm. Each location that you build will have a cost in the top left corner. Mine has a cost in coins, so I'll pay 2 coins from my supply to the bank. Some locations will also have a requirement in food and water. As you can see right here, this player's building doesn't cost any coins, but it does cost 1 food. When paying food, food can be taken from any location on a player's farm and placed to pay for that location.
Some buildings, as you can see, also require water. My building costs 3 coins, which I paid to the bank, and 1 water, which I moved from my water tower here. Water can only be moved 2 cards away that are orthogonal to the water tower. So you can see that this is 2 cards away. I was able to pay for my field with that water.
In addition to the costs printed on a card, cards will also have certain abilities. They could either have a harvest ability that would take place in a later phase. They might have game end abilities that will give players points depending on how they build their farm, and they could have an immediate ability.
As you can see here, the potato field that I added to my farm gives me an immediate ability to get 2 food and to get an equipment tile. Since I have storage space available in my silo, I can take the 2 food and put it there. If at any time you would get resources and you don't have storage space for them, then you lose those resources. Now, the way equipment tiles work is you draw 2 tiles and you choose one that you'd like to keep. Equipment can only be placed on a card that's already in your farm. Now, I could use either one of these equipment tiles. One enhances my silo and one would enhance my water tower. Now, let's say I drew one that couldn't go in my farm right away, or let's say I'd just rather use it at a later time. I can keep it and set it aside and add it to a card that I add to my farm at a later time, but it would have to be added right when I add the card to my farm. I couldn't add it to a building that had already been there for a couple of rounds. I'm going to go ahead and keep this guy and make my silo better by giving it 2 extra storage slots. My silo can now store 6 wheat.
To further illustrate how equipment tiles work, each equipment tile will have a type of building printed at the top that the tile must be placed on. There may also be an ability printed as well. So for instance, on this tile it says Field Harvest, which means that I have to place this tile on a field card with a harvest ability. This player's building had a similar ability to David's, which will give 3 coins immediately, and they get to draw an equipment tile. They weren't able to draw a tile that they can use just now, so they can place it off to the side and use it when they build a field with a harvest ability later. So the next action that you can take in your turn is, instead of building the location that you've selected, you can build a water tower or a silo. After revealing your cards simultaneously with all other players, you can discard the card that you've selected to a common discard pile and take, in my instance, a water tower card. This card can be placed with the same placement rules as normal locations. This location right here gives me a bonus during the harvest for each adjacent water tower, so I think I'll place mine right here. When placing a water tower, it costs 2 coins, so once again I'll pay these coins from my supply. And when a water tower is built, it immediately fills up with water. So I'll take 3 water tokens and place them on this water tower.
In a similar fashion, you could choose to build a silo. I'll take the card that I selected and turned over at the same time as all of the players and discard it to the discard pile, and I'll take a silo. This goes into your farm just like other cards, with the same placement rules. The difference in a silo and a water tower is that a silo doesn't cost any coins to build, but it also doesn't give you any wheat initially. It just increases your wheat storage. One of the other actions you can take on your turn is going to market. Since we've chosen our cards, we'll reveal them at the same time, but I'm going to choose to go to market with my card. What that means is I discard the card into the discard pile, and then I can get money for that card. You get paid 2 coins for your card. You can choose when you go to market to get additional coins for selling food. I've got a little bit of a surplus right now, so I'll sell 2 of my food. each food you choose to sell, and 2 is the max, you would get an additional 2 coins per food. So that will give me 4 more coins from the bank.
During a go-to-market action, you can sell up to 2 food, so the maximum amount of coins that you can get would be 6. And you can just choose to sell 1 food if you want to, but you'll always get at least 2 for selling the location that you selected. The last action that you can take is refreshing a location. Now, a location can be refreshed once it turns into an open area, and that can happen during the harvest phase. So we'll explain the details of that during our harvest phase explanation, but just for an example, you can see that there's a location in my farm that's been turned over and has become an open area. So to take the refresh action, after simultaneously revealing with all of the players, you will discard the card that you've selected, then pay 1 coin to the bank, and you can then turn over any open areas and make them usable locations within your farm again.
Next, we'll talk about the harvest phase. During the harvest phase, any card with a harvest ability can be activated by paying the ability's cost. If a player is unable or unwilling to pay the cost, the card turns over and becomes an open area. But if you do pay the cost, you immediately get the benefit that you would get from harvesting that card. For example, my cornfields here cost 2 water to harvest, but they give me 1 food. And if there are 2 silos within 2 squares, I get an additional food. I do have 2 silos within 2 squares of my cornfield, so this is going to give me 3 food total.
An important thing to note during the harvest phase is that distance requirements are still in effect. So, for instance, if a harvest ability that requires water is more than 2 spaces away from one of your water tower cards, that ability can't be activated. And also, storage limitations have to be taken into account. If you get food that you can't store, or if you get water that can't be placed in a location, it's wasted. So it's essential to plan out your timing correctly.
It's important to note that harvest abilities can be activated in any order that the player chooses. So if you plan out your actions correctly, you can make sure that you always have the space to store the goods that you get and the goods to pay for the abilities you want to activate.
So as you can see in this example, this player was able to complete all but 1 of their harvest abilities, which means that this card becomes an open area.
During our harvest phase, we were following the suggestion in the rulebook to move resources onto harvest abilities as we take them to keep track of which abilities have been activated. Now that the harvest phase is over, all resources are removed from those cards so they don't get confused with your stored resources.
So at the start of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round, we'll have a full upkeep phase. The first thing that happens during the upkeep phase is the first player marker will be passed to the next player in a clockwise direction. The round marker will be moved to the next round, which will also indicate that cards will now be passed in a different direction.
Next, all players will gain resources. During the upkeep phase, players gain 1 food, 2 water, and 3 coins. It's important to note that if you don't have room to store your food or water that you gain, you'll lose it. So Paul will have to lose 1 of the food that he would have gained during this upkeep phase. It's also important to remember that this is the only time that water can be freely assigned. During the upkeep phase, you can put your water in any water tower that has open storage space. Otherwise, once it's there, it can't be moved. Food can always be moved from one silo to another as long as you don't exceed the storage limits.
Then each player in turn order will draw 6 cards from the 4 stacks as we explained earlier. After completing 4 rounds and completing 1 final harvest phase, game end and scoring can begin. As you can see from the table, these are not fully developed farms, these are just examples for scoring. The first thing to do is to count up all of the victory points printed on the cards and the locations in your farm, and add any victory point tokens that you've collected during the game.
As you can see, I have 3 victory point tokens that I got from one of my equipment tiles in-game ability. It tells me that I can pay 1 coin for each food on the silo that this equipment is attached to and get a victory point token for each one. So I paid my 3 coins for my 3 wheat and got 3 victory point tokens. Victory point tokens can also be acquired by having unused equipment cards at the end of the game. This player has 1, so he'll get 1 victory point token.
Players will also score 1 point for each 3 coins in their supply at the end of the game. They'll score 1 point for each 2 food stored in the silos on their locations. And if a player manages to have any empty water tower cards, they get 1 point for that as well. The last thing to take into account is any locations that have a game end ability. As you can see, I have one building that says I'll gain 1 victory point for each meat livestock within 3 spaces. So I have one card that matches that requirement, so I'll get 1 victory point for that.
The game also includes a convenient score pad to keep track of all of that, so you don't have to count up all those points in your head.
So that's our video. We hope that it was helpful and we hope that you enjoyed it.
If you'd like to see more content from the Dicey Review, please check out our website, thediceyreview.com, or look at our YouTube channel. You can also find our guild on BoardGameGeek.com. You can also email us at thediceyreview@gmail.com if you have any questions or you'd like any clarification on anything we covered.
Also, don't forget to check out our podcast. You can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, or any other podcast app. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, we'll see you at the table.